Good morning. I just thought I'd give you a quick overview of what we're going to be covering today. Emily and I are going to spend about an hour sharing our story, our testimony of our relationship. Then we're going to spend about 25 minutes or so, or 20 minutes, sharing about some principles that every one of you should keep in mind as you're going through this tumultuous time of before I say I do. And then Allison and Alexander are going to be coming up and sharing some principles and then later sharing their testimony. So it's going to be broken down into 3 parts. There'll be about a 5-minute break between each segment. You can get up and go use the restroom if you need to, stretch your legs. But don't go too far because we are going to start up again shortly after that.
Just need enough time to be able to switch out the tapes in between, so that's why there's a 5-minute break in between. And besides, we don't want you to have to sit for 3 hours, so. But hopefully the time will go by quickly, because it should be fairly exciting at times. So anyway, we wanted to start out by sharing with you our experience and how the Lord brought us together. And we want to preface this by making it very clear that this is the experience the Lord brought us through. This does not mean that any one of you need to go away feeling like you need to have a similar experience or need to do things the same way. And also as a word of caution to the parents, I know a lot of times it's easy to be sitting there elbowing your young people and saying, listen, you need to do this. I've been telling you this, just do this. Everyone has their own experience, so try to glean the principles that you can extrapolate from this, go home and pray about them, talk as a family, and the Lord will lead you through your own experience that will be every bit as beautiful. So just as a word of, preliminary, not to feel like we're going to be telling you how to do things.
In other words, don't necessarily try to copy what we did, because I wouldn't want anyone to have to go through that. It was wonderful for us, but there were some challenges, and we're going to be sharing about that.
You'll be hearing about them.
So a lot of people wonder how we met, how long we've known each other. And we've actually known each other for a very long time. We don't actually remember first meeting.
Yeah.
Which is kind of surprising because most people, remember when they first met their spouse. But Emily and I have known each other since we were 5, back in the Lincoln log cabin days. We built, one of the first memories that I have of being with Emily is we built a little log cabin. And I remember so distinctly her brother he was just standing there just wanting to knock over this little cabin that we had built.
And that wasn't, we found out from our parents, that wasn't the first time we were together, so that is some of our first memories, but we actually had met a few months before that, so sorry that we can't tell you when we first met because neither of us remember that date, but we were pretty little.
So that doesn't mean that we were necessarily in a relationship at that time.
Certainly not.
I mean, we were 5 years old.
Not at all.
We grew up knowing each other and being friends. And, it's just amazing to me how the Lord led in our lives. I was about 18 years old when I realized I had been kind of struggling through, what am I going to do with my life? Where is the Lord leading me? What does He have in store for me? And I was praying as we were driving home this one particular, after visiting Emily and her family. And I was just really praying to the Lord because I wasn't sure how He was leading. I knew that I was, getting older. I was only 18 at the time, but, it felt kind of older at the time. Now I really wonder. That's almost been 10 years ago.
Yeah, it has.
And so I knew that there were other people that might be interested in Emily, and I thought that I might have an interest there, and I wasn't sure, but I was praying to the Lord about it, and I had this distinct impression. It was almost like I heard a voice enough to make me just kind of like, whoa, what was that? And the Lord spoke to my heart and said, Isaac, you will marry Emily someday. I was like, woo. That doesn't happen to everybody. A lot of people have, as you'll hear from Alexander and Allison, they had time of struggling and waiting and not knowing if they would ever be married. But the Lord knows every heart, and He knows what will keep that heart. And that is what was so exciting to me. Because I prayed about it a lot, and I thought, wow, was that just like my mind making that up? You know how we do that sometimes when we hear a voice, we kind of go, no, I just kind of came up with that. That was just something that, just kind of slipped in. But I prayed a lot about it, and I felt an assurance, I felt a peace. And it was just amazing, that peace that flooded my soul when I realized that I didn't have to worry about it. The Lord had his plans laid for me. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I went out and started showing interest in Emily right away.
No, in fact, I had no idea at all that he had this thought. And I think a lot of young people would say, wow, that's great. It's God's will for me to get married, so let's just get going on things. I mean, great. I actually know for sure this is God's will. But there was absolutely no change whatsoever in any of his actions toward me, the way he interacted, the conversations that we had, and the way that our friendship developed. There was no inkling whatsoever in my mind at all.
I think, looking back on it, being more mature and being able to see things a little bit more clearly, the Lord was speaking to my heart because he knew that would keep my heart. I had temptations to maybe have, start up a friendship with someone else and, pursue a little bit deeper of a friendship. But the Lord knew that I needed to have my heart kept. And so that's, I believe, why he spoke to me in that clear of a way, that he wanted me to keep myself, because maybe I would be too easily influenced, meet someone else's needs, get too emotionally involved. And so it was really exciting to me, looking back on it, that the Lord specifically led in that area. One text that really spoke to my heart in a special way is Isaiah 8, verse 20. Isaiah 8, verse 20. And this is one of those ways that we can tell whether it's the Lord speaking to us or whether it's our own heart. To the law and to the testimony, if they speak not according to this word, it is because there is no light in them.
I think that, can I say something there?
Go ahead.
Quick? I think that the importance for that is that a lot of times, people can hear maybe an impression from the Holy Spirit like Isaac did and jump on that and want to react in a way of saying, well, great, let's pursue a relationship. But does that follow principles that are in God's Word? There's very clear principles that a young person not out of their teens is not fit to be a judge of a life companion. So that's where that comes into play, because it's true that he heard God speaking to him, but that didn't mean there was a green light. There's other things in God's Word and in the spirit of prophecy that were very indicative that he needed to wait, have patience on the Lord, and to continue in a proper way. And so that's why it's important that we take all the principles and blend them together so we can have a balanced life.
I knew that I needed to be able to finish my education and have a way to be able to provide for a family. That is a prerequisite for being able to start a relationship. Being able to have your education done with, whether that be a practical training or whether that be finishing college or whatever, and to be able to have a way to actually make money and be able to support a family. Because if you can't support a family, you're going to be going through some really, really difficult times trying to make sure that the funds always meet.
So then we're going to skip ahead a little bit to when we actually, let's back up and give some dates. So when you were 18, that was in 2001. So now it is 2003. So a couple years have gone by. It's the spring of 2003, and we found ourselves at a Spanish camp meeting that's in our area. And we went with his parents. They went to the English meetings. We went to the Spanish meetings. Again, girls, I had no idea whatsoever. I've grown up with this guy. We're good friends. He was learning Spanish at school. I spoke Spanish myself, so there's something that we had a mutual interest in. No idea whatsoever in my mind there was anything more than that. And so we went to the Spanish camp meeting, and it became evident. I mean, we went to all the meetings by ourselves because my parents-in-law, they weren't at the time, my friend's parents went to the English meetings, so we were always going to the Spanish meetings. And it didn't occur to me that people would just assume that we were together. But yeah, I mean, obviously, looking back on it now, of course they would assume we were together. So at the end of Sabbath evening, when the meeting was finished, one of the pastors came up to us and asked us if we were going together, if we were in a relationship. And that just so was not in my thinking. I'm like, no, not at all. And meanwhile, while I'm so adamantly responding, I didn't hear what he told the guy.
I said, not yet.
And I didn't even hear that because I was, doing my own answer. And then the pastor responded, he's like, not yet, huh? And I'm like, did you just say that? I could not believe
She turned so
that
red,
he
it was
said
really
that.
funny.
I was like, did you just say that? And he just kind of like started to walk out, and I'm following him. I'm like, did you say that? Why did you say that? Well, he didn't really have an answer for me at that time. I was trying to poke him for one and be like, what are you saying? But anyway, that was the end of it. And again, there was nothing after that. He didn't seem any different, didn't act any different. So a few more months went by, and then we went camping. Am I talking too much?
No.
Okay.
No.
So anyway, we were on this camping trip, and we had a mutual friend of their families, friend of our families that had been visiting. So we invited their family over to come camping with us so we could have the weekend together. And as I was thinking about the fact that they were going to be coming over, I just was like, I probably need to have a talk with Isaac.
I was really glad to be invited too, because that other fellow was about my age. And I just got to be in the right place at the right time, right?
Whatever. So anyway.
I was still learning to be able to trust and know that the Lord would actually fulfill his word. But I was also happy to be able to spend time with you.
So, because my mind was in a totally different place, I thought, well, this would be a great chance to just, be like, hey, just want to make sure, I've been thinking about that comment you made a few months ago at that camp meeting, and just wondering where that came from, and I just want to make sure that we're on the same page. We're just friends, nothing more than that. I just want to I don't want there to be anything.
She was really trying to set me straight. That's really what it was about,
Well, I just said, I don't want it to get to the point where if he had something different in his heart than I didn't want him to get hurt over that. I mean, I can understand that if you have maybe your mind going in a certain direction and the other person doesn't, and all of a sudden you find out way down the road that you've just been thinking this all this time, and I mean, that could be heartbreaking, or it could at least cause a lot of discouragement and pain that is unnecessary. So, hey, I'll just save all that. I mean, just let him know right now that we just need to make sure we're on the same page, and we're just going to be friends for the rest of our lives. So, you can get married, I'll get married, we'll still be friends, and whatever. So, anyway, so this is my plan, okay? This was my plan. But I did pray about it, and I said, Lord, if it's your will that I have this conversation, then you'll have to provide the opportunity. So the whole weekend went by, and there was no opportunity. And I thought, well, maybe then this is just my own thinking. And I think that I had actually talked to my parents. I'm sure that I had. I don't remember exactly the sequence, but I think I maybe even told them that I was planning on having this conversation or was thinking about it. And so anyway, then right at the very end, it was time to leave, and we had several vehicles there, so everyone was figuring out, who was riding with who out to the highway. It was only like a 5-minute ride out there, but we were people were switching around, and it ended up that he rode in my car. And it was just the two of us, so I was like, perfect, great opportunity. 5 minutes. So anyway, I had my little speech.
She did have a little speech. And it was basically that, I don't know exactly how you feel, but I just want you to know that, I don't see any future in our...
I think I didn't tell you that till the next day.
Oh, you didn't tell me that till the next day. Okay. Well, you wanted to make sure...
So I just wanted to make sure he knew that yeah, he just needed to be friends, and that's as far as it was going to go.
Yeah. Can we get the howl fixed? I'm not sure is my mic... Oh, we'll push this one down? Okay, there we go. Just keeps on recurring. Okay. So
how'd that make you feel?
Wow, it was one of those moments that very painful, let's put it that way. It wasn't that painful actually in the car, but the next day we talked on the phone.
Yeah, he actually didn't really say much, which I thought, great, that was perfect, Guess we're on the same page.
So we talked the next day on the phone, and Emily explained to me, she's like, I don't want you to get hurt and to have, you be thinking that our friendship is any more than what it is. And I'm thinking, okay, I wonder how this is going. And so I said, well, do you see any future for our friendship more than just a friendship? And Emily came back just like that. No. It was just like, oh, dagger through my heart. And so then she asked the same question back to me.
And then there was like 5 minutes of silence on the phone. I'm sure it wasn't that long. It felt like it. It was long enough. I'm like, are you there?
But I said, well, actually I do. You know, I've prayed about it, and I do see more of a relationship, you know, something more developing out of just our friendship. And Emily's immediate response was, well, do we need to talk to the parents about it yet? And I'm like, well, wait a minute, you know, we're not, I'm not saying like right now. So I thought that it was just a matter of her wanting to be proper, which would have been very appropriate as well, that she said no because she just was trying to be proper about it. But she actually meant no.
Yeah.
At least I had that little shred of hope to hang on to for a couple more weeks. And in this whole process, you know, I had been in communication with my parents. They knew what I was talking about, what I was thinking. And they were encouraging me to be able to continue. I was still working on my degree at the time. To finish my, I have a 2-year associate's degree in web development. And so that would give me a trade to be able to provide for a family. So even though we had an interest in each other, it didn't necessarily, I had an interest in you at the time. It didn't necessarily mean that we were going to move forward with having an actual relationship.
One of the things that I really appreciated after that little episode on the phone, I actually thought that I probably wouldn't hear from him for a while. I mean, I could tell that I had really hurt him, and I felt bad about that, but I had to be honest. There was nothing. I had no attractions, just, you know, those kind of desires whatsoever. He was just a really good friend, and that's as far as I could ever see it going. And so I went home from work, and I talked to my parents, and I was like, I probably won't be hearing from him for a while, I guess. You know, that's too bad, but anyway, I found out that actually that wasn't the case. He did not change one bit in the way that he had been treating me. It had been proper all along, never leading me to any feelings that he was pursuing me in any way. And after that conversation, nothing changed. The next time we talked on the phone, part of the reason we were talking on the phone is he was taking a Spanish class at the time, and they required an hour per week of communication with someone who spoke Spanish. So he would call me, and we would talk for an hour in Spanish. So I assumed actually the next week that I probably wouldn't hear from him. But same as always, he called, and there was not any difference in his tone of voice. There was no difference in the way that he related to anything. We were still just as good of friends, and that really actually meant a lot to me because I could see that it wasn't, that he didn't have any motives that were improper. So,
but your mind did eventually change.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can't forget that part. Obviously, I'm here. So about 6 weeks after that, I was praying one morning, not even thinking in the least about him or even my future prospective husband at all. It wasn't even in my thoughts in the least. And very clearly, the Lord spoke to me right in the middle of my prayer and said, think of every positive thing that you can think about Isaac if you were ever to marry him. Just things that, and I was like, oh, okay. So I started thinking about different things, and I suddenly started realizing that a lot of my goals and a lot of my desires were actually the same as his. I know this one seems very insignificant, but Spanish, for one thing. Spanish is something that I feel I enjoy very much, and I had always hoped and dreamed that if I were ever to get married and we would have children, that they would be able to learn Spanish from infancy in the home. And obviously, to have a husband that had no desire in that language or didn't speak it at all, that would be very difficult because that would always feel like there was a separation in the home. I wouldn't want to be talking to my children in Spanish and my husband not understanding what was being said. And so that's just a very little thing, but it's like, wow, that's actually major. I mean, you know, and he's my same race, which is also what was also important to me. So that combination right there is unusual. And so that was just one thing out of many. You know, the dedication and commitment that I saw him making in his personal life with the Lord and different things like that. It's like, wow, how have I been so blind before this? I mean, and it was a very eye-opening experience to me. And so I went to my parents that day, and I'm like, I think I'm changing my mind. I mean, the feelings aren't there, but this all seems like it makes a lot of sense. Do you think that God would ever require me to marry somebody that I didn't love just because it was the right thing to do out of principle? And they said, don't ever worry about that. If he's the one for you, God will supply the feelings just in his own time. So then I started, a couple more weeks went by, and I started thinking, well, maybe I should, say, well, I've changed my mind, just to give him a little hope or something. But I talked to my parents again. They said, if it's God's will, he'll bring it around all in good time. And within a short amount of time, Isaac's like, can I ask you a question? Sure. Have you changed your mind at all on anything? I'm like, why? He's like, well, you seem different. So anyway, that was the beginnings of a...
Did I actually ask you if you changed your mind,
yes.
Or was it that I talked to your dad?
You asked me first if I changed my mind.
Oh, okay.
And then you talked to my dad.
Then I talked to her dad.
He wanted to make sure I was actually on board first, for sure, before he called the dad.
So I had that call. And it wasn't the call to ask if I could date her daughter or anything, but I just thought it would be wise to keep her father apprised of, what my intentions were, and that I wasn't looking to start a relationship right away, but I had some interest there, and we'd talked about it and prayed about it. So it was a stressful conversation for me. But it was really good. My father-in-law brought forth a lot of points of, what do you see yourself doing in a couple of years? What do you have as far as lined up for being able to provide? What are your spiritual goals? And it was a really good talk to be able to, have an understanding and be able to share a little bit back and forth. It was stressful for me at the time, but it was a blessing.
Somewhere around this time, Isaac sent me a little plaque that I hung on my wall that had this verse, Jeremiah 29:11, on it, and this became one of my favorite verses at this point in my life. The Lord says, "For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you an expected end." Other versions say, to give you a future and a hope. And that's what the little plaque said that I had on my wall. And that was really meaningful to me, because every morning I saw that in my room there when I woke up, and it just helped me remember that God has a plan for my life, and I can trust in that.
So even though I had talked to her parents, or to her father, and we kind of knew that, we were moving towards having a relationship, we still didn't actually start our relationship. I still had schooling that I was working on completing, and we weren't at a point where we were ready to start a relationship. So we spent the next year deepening our friendship. I guess it was several months, and getting our lives squared around. I was able to graduate with my associate's degree, and so I kind of had my little milestone done that I wanted to be able to have. It would be able to provide me with a way to provide for a family if we decided to get married sooner, even though I did continue on with more school.
So it came to August of 2004. And like Isaac said, he graduated, and I was able to be at his graduation. My whole family got to go for that. That was a lot of fun. And so anyway, now we're in August of 2004, and we were on our way over. My sister and I were on our way to a friend's wedding, and so we had to fly out of Spokane. So we went over the day before so we could spend the night with Schlittenhart family. And I had no idea that Isaac had something special planned for me. But when we went to the school where he was working at the time, part-time, and we met, so that's where we met him, and he was just about ready to leave work. So he's like, well, you can ride home with me. I said, okay. So I got in the car, and we started on our way home, I thought, and I wasn't very familiar with Spokane at the time, but I seemed to think we were taking a little bit different route than normal, and I was like, well, I thought we were supposed to go that way. He's like, no, we're good. Oh, okay, whatever. So anyway, well, we weren't going home. We were going out to a restaurant. And once we drove into the restaurant, I knew for sure this was going to be a big day for me. So then I got all nervous.
So I had called ahead at the restaurant, and I had a rose there and a lily as well. So the waitress brought out the lily at first. And
when how they always ask you if you want anything to drink, they bring out the water or whatever. Well, it came out on the water tray was this huge lily. I was like, wow, that's beautiful. And then I found out it came from his garden. It's like, how did that get here? Thought, wow, there's some planning that went into this. I really must be in for something. Heart's pounding.
She didn't eat hardly anything. I didn't get that, It was like she really didn't. She really wasn't.
I couldn't even see the menu. I just kept looking at it, but it's like nothing was. I couldn't read the words, So finally, I was like, "Did you figure out what you want to order?" Oh, well, yeah, whatever you're ordering sounds great to me. So I didn't want to admit that I couldn't focus on anything.
So that was the day that we officially started our relationship as boyfriend and girlfriend. And even though we started our relationship, we still had to continue balancing our lives. It didn't mean that we were able to jump in full time and start planning for a wedding. We still wanted to be able to grow together, to be able to learn more about each other's personalities, and we still had continuing engagements. I had work, and I was continuing doing school, working on my bachelor's degree.
At this point as well, it's very important to bring out young people that we were, both of us, separately up until this point and now together, we're in very open communication with our parents, wanting them to know where we were, what we were thinking, what their desires were for us in our relationship as well, because we wanted to honor and respect them. And so we had a conversation shortly after this time to find out, you know, what everybody's thinking as far as physical contact. Now we are officially in a relationship. Does that mean that we're going to act like we're engaged and we're just all over each other? There has to be stages, because otherwise, before you know it, you got to get married within a few months potentially, because all the hormones and the feelings and the emotions and the affections can become so strong that we really wanted to guard against those avenues and do things in a proper way so that the Lord could bless us in our relationship. And one of the things that became evident right toward the beginning of this stage was that we needed to be obviously careful with each other in the amount of physical contact that we had, but also that means with other people. And one of the things that I did not recognize to the point that I did when we discussed this was that he started feeling like he was no different than any of my other guy friends. You know, we weren't going, at this point, our parents didn't feel that it would be proper for us to start holding hands all the time. That's what their wish was. So, and again, we want to be very careful that we're not setting up precedents that you guys think you need to follow exactly. Okay, this is just our own experience. So that was what our parents requested of us at that time. Okay, well, I wasn't holding hands with any of my other guy friends, so, you know, that was nothing different. And with hugging, they wanted it to be more limited to hellos and goodbyes, and, you know, maybe for pictures to have our arms around each other, whatever, in a picture. Well, Isaac started to feel like, hey, you know what? I'm no different than any of her other friends. When she goes to camp meeting, you know,
she gave all of her other friends hugs.
Close friends, people I've grown up with, people that are like brothers to me. And Isaac said, what's different about me? I'm not any different for you than some of your other friends. And I'm like, well, I feel different towards you, but there was no manifestation of that. And so that really spoke to my heart, girls, and I want to give you the opportunity to maybe figure this out a little ahead of time. You need to be very careful. We need to be very careful, even in our associations with friends that we've grown up with, or people that we say, oh, I don't care anything about him, he's just a friend. How are we treating these people? Are we saving ourselves for that special someone so that when they come into our lives, we don't have to be all over them in a different way in order to show them that they're different than all the rest of our friends? And we're going to be talking about that a little bit more in the next segment.
So I ended up, I guess it was about a year later, or was it later that year that I got a job?
I don't remember.
I don't recall. It was 2005 that I got the job. So it was a year later. I continued going to school, and then I got hired full-time at a place that I had worked while I was a student. And so this is another area that don't necessarily think that you should copy, because it was a very large trial for us to work through building our house together. But the Lord provided me with a job, and so I started going out to look around. I thought, well, it'd be good to be able to invest in something instead of, you know, just putting the money in the bank. And so the Lord really led and blessed us with the property that we purchased together.
It was we knew very distinctly that it was God's will for us to purchase this land through a series of events that happened that were miracles and that were, you know, were totally unexpected to us, that we knew for sure 100% it was God's will for us to purchase the property that we have. Otherwise, we probably would not have planned to purchase raw land and build a home before we got married.
That was definitely not in my plans. I was thinking more along the lines of buying someplace to fix up, but the Lord just dropped this piece of property directly into our hands. The property wasn't even for sale, and other people, I guess, had tried to purchase the property, but we were blessed with an individual at my work that wanted to be able to see us get started in life and be able to help us out by doing that.
During this time, we were we had started to have morning and evening worship together. We felt that that would be something that would be very helpful for both of us. So every morning on his way to work, he would call me and we would read together from the Bible and have a little bit of prayer time. And then in the evening as well, before we would retire for the night, we would pray together and discuss our day. So we felt that that was one of the things that helped to draw us closer together in a different way, because as we had been just friends before, we hadn't spent that time with the spiritual connection as we now had as we were in a relationship.
So on June 30, 2006, I had a number of things planned that was extremely special for us to be able to share together. I used the excuse that it was her mother's birthday the day before, so I took her mother out for lunch. And I guess Emily kind of
wondered about that. It's like, he's taking my mom out for her birthday. That's nice. I mean, that's great.
That's a very, very good excuse. So,
and I wanted to say also that just reminded me about this. Sorry.
Okay.
That's another thing, girls, that's good to be watching for, is not just how does he treat your mother, how does he treat his own mother? Because that's a very good indication of how you will be treated as wife. A lot of times it's like, oh, he's great, he's perfect, he's this and that, and he's so kind and so gentlemanly. But if he's sassing his mom all the time and being disrespectful and rebellious toward her, it's very dangerous to think that that will somehow change. Because unfortunately, once the novelty of marriage has worn off, he will be who he is. And so that was one thing that I really appreciated, was the way he was very caring toward his mother, toward my mother, toward any other women in his life, that he was very much a gentleman, to always open the door for ladies, to always be very courteous, and that was one thing that I really appreciated a lot.
So we were engaged on our property that we had bought together, and we had a special engagement. I had a bench all set up, and I tried to fool her, but that's pretty hard to do when your heart is about ready to jump right out of your chest.
That was actually the biggest giveaway. I thought that he might have something planned, but when I was sitting there on that bench and I could see his shirt just, I could see his heart just pounding.
Visibly through my shirt. She could just...
Sure.
I guess those things are kind of hard to control. Why don't you share a little bit about some of the tools that we learned?
So at this stage in our relationship, again, we felt that it was very important to have steps that would lead us toward marriage. And now that we were engaged, we wanted to very much focus on developing tools that we would use in our marriage. And one of the things that we, besides having our worship time morning and evening, we also began reading through a book on love and respect. Is that what you wanted me to talk about? Or am I getting too far ahead?
And actually, come to think of it, we didn't actually start reading the Love and Respect book right away.
I'm getting a little bit ahead of it, because we had some experiences that happened.
So we started developing our land, being able to get it ready to have a house on it. And how many of you guys have ever built before? A few hands go up.
Or remodeled.
Or
done any kind of construction project, major project.
Major project.
A few more hands are going up. So maybe you can relate to, it's not a breeze.
Is it easy to do? Is it very stressful? Okay.
So we were going through this building project, and just to give you a little bit of an idea where we are, okay, we're engaged, so we're very happy, we're very much in love. I live 4 hours away in Montana with my parents. He lives there locally with his parents, about 25 minutes from where our property was. And he's working full time, he's going to school, and he's trying to nurture a relationship with me and build a house. Okay, so you're getting an idea that we have a very stressful part of our lives. We had very limited communication on the phone. Again, it was primarily only on his way to work and on his way home, just very short times. In that time, we wanted to be able to still continue studying and praying together, but we also have major things that are going on with the decision-making of building a house and things that we need to plan and decide. At the same time, we have not only the two of us that are working on a house, we have 6 adults who have an opinion, okay? Because I'm living with my parents, he's living with his parents, and they're very much a part of this, and they very much want to help, which we appreciate that. But if you can just put yourselves in our place for a little bit and try to visualize 6 people building a house, okay? It's very helpful and very stressful.
Everybody had their own idea of how things should be done. And so we found ourselves getting into what we learned to be called the crazy cycle. I don't know how many of you have been exposed to Dr. Eggert's, is it?
Something like that.
He wrote a book called Love and Respect. And we started going through this book because we found that we were having this communication that was less than ideal. We found that we were starting to kind of go at each other. So an example would be, well, sweetie, I worked on that sink in the bathroom today, and we decided to go ahead and move the plumbing over to the other wall because...
Who's we? Hang on. Who's we? We talked about this yesterday. Are you talking about we, or are you talking about you and your dad?
Well, it's best if we move the plumbing over to this other wall because
yeah,
we
but
can
we
at
already
least...
talked about that. It can't be that way.
But I've actually sat down and figured it out, and it's going to actually work better if we do it this way.
Okay, well, I really wish that you would have called me because it seems like every time we get off the phone, you go talking to your dad about things, and I don't know if he's just changing your mind because he wants to do things a different way or what's going on, but I feel like we don't have the communication that we need.
Well, that's fine, but the thing is that your parents are pushing me to get this house done, and I just can't...
Yeah, but can't you understand that I don't want to get married and not have a house to move into?
I know, but the thing is that this is a change that needs to be done, and you just don't trust me to be able to work on the house.
Okay, so it's a little hard to reenact, okay, but you can get the idea that unfortunately a lot of our communication ended up being at each other, and because we were trying to spare each other, we very often would blame the parents. Is that fair? No, it's not. And instead of facing ourselves and understanding where we each were going wrong in our communication, it was easier to blame somebody else. But that's very hurtful, and it can be hurtful in a marriage, and it was hurtful for us in an engaged relationship because we naturally want to defend our parents. No, it wasn't my dad that made me. I've sat down and planned this out myself. It wasn't him that, okay, maybe he suggested the idea, but he's built a house himself, so he has some wisdom. I mean, we can't negate that fact. And so it was easy for us to try to pit each other's parents against each other, and that was not healthy. It was not healthy at all.
So we came to realize that we had a need to be able to go through some tools that would help us be able to improve our communication, because we realized that we were at each other, that we were blaming each other's parents, that we were... and They had a part, too, to play. There was added stressors of having their influence, but it was not an excuse for us to be able to communicate the way that we were.
I think that it was one of the most effective tools for us to be able to start learning was when we were reading practically this book on how to have love toward the woman and respect toward the man. I did not ever view myself as a disrespectful person. And I know that in Ephesians 5, it talks a lot about the husband loving the wife and the wife submitting herself to her husband. And a lot of times that can sound like a very negative thing. It doesn't have to be a negative thing. Women, when you want to experience the love that your husband has toward you, that will come automatically as a result of showing him the respect and the honor that's very important to him, and vice versa. And so as we began reading through this book, Isaac would say things to me like, that doesn't feel respectful when you talk to me that way. And it just blew me away. I'm like, I'm not being disrespectful. I'm just trying to help you understand that I don't feel like you really care about me. And we realized very quickly that actually we were in this crazy cycle, even though we're not even married. And people were telling us, oh, you just wait till the first year of marriage. We're like, boy, we're going through it already, you know. But so we started being able to put into practice some of these principles that Ephesians 5 talks about. And I had to come to the point where I recognized that when I say things like, you know, well, you didn't discuss this with me, are you just making this decision? That does come across in a very disrespectful way and make him feel like, you know, I just spent 3 hours figuring out how to do this, and I wasn't able to communicate with you during this time because you're traveling or you're doing this or that or the other thing. And that was actually another stressor that came into it, was I was still traveling a lot at the time. And so for him, that was very hard, because you can imagine, here he is, working full time, going to school, building a house, and still living at home and trying to maintain me being happy, while I'm off, in his words, going around having a grand old time, seeing friends, traveling the world, world, not a care, you know. Can you imagine how that would make him feel? And I tried to say, oh, I'm not just going traveling the world and having fun. Do you realize that this is stressful? It's not glamorous to travel around the place and have late nights and have to be, you know, traveling on airplanes all the time. And I tried to come back and say, you know, it's not like you think it is, but we weren't finding our connection in submission and surrender to God.
So, as we worked through this book, Love and Respect, we were able to break that crazy cycle. But it wasn't easy. All the way up to even the rehearsal night for our wedding, we had some differences of opinions with family members, with each other, and we realized that we were going at each other again in this crazy cycle. And we decided at that point to make a commitment that we would not argue once we got married.
So the crux of it for us was, here we are. Our rehearsal is finished. We're getting married this weekend. You know, we've been through a huge amount of stress together, and we don't want to portray it that our engagement was just horrible. Okay, we had very stressful times, but we had great times. We did fun things together. Some fun things together. We were very busy, so almost all of our time was, you know, trying to work on the house. But we made sure we had time for each other as well. But here it is. It's our wedding weekend. Should be the happiest time of our lives up until this point. And we find ourselves in another argument, and it was just like, what is wrong with us, you know? It's God's will for us to get married. What's wrong? And we made the commitment right then. We have to stop what we're doing and really apply these principles, and we committed to the Lord and to each other. When we enter into our marriage, we will not argue. Not because we won't have conflict, but because we are going to make a commitment. And when you make a commitment, it's different than just making a decision. We committed to each other and to the Lord that we will, with God's help, when we start entering into these difficult situations, that we will realize we are not enemies. We are together. We have a common foe. We need to just stop and say, okay, look, we are in love with each other. We're not at each other, okay? So we need to just take a break if we need to and cool down. And so it was actually amazing when Paul and Carolyn did their message a couple days ago, or yesterday, whenever it was about, I think it was a couple days ago, about the arguing. If you guys remember that, I'm sure those of you that were here, it's going to stick in our minds. We looked at each other and with big smiles on our faces said, you know what? Praise the Lord, since we've been married, we have not ever experienced that. And it's not because of anything that we've done. It's not because we're different than anyone else. It's because the Lord took us through that same experience, like a lot of people go through in that first year of marriage. He took us through that ahead of time and taught us some very important lessons. And young people, that should be an encouragement to you. God is giving you the tools right now. If you apply these in your life, in your home currently, with your brothers and sisters and your parents, and then as you enter into a relationship, you don't have to go through all the same things that you may hear the adults talk about, because God can start working on our hearts at any point in our lives.
So that commitment to never argue has really been a blessing. Now, that's not to say that we haven't been attacked. Our marriage has been attacked. We've had challenges. We've had times where maybe one person would kind of go off the track and the other person would stay on. But thankfully, for the most part, both of us have stayed, you know, either one or the other, and we can help each other up, like the Bible says.
Because we made such a strong commitment, we found that there's been times where we've started into a disagreement, and all of a sudden it's like, hang on, we have to stop, because we don't want to break that commitment. We're getting ready to argue, okay? So we're getting really close. So it's not that we haven't ever had disagreements or that we haven't had things to work through. But thankfully, we've been able to learn these tools of showing respect and love in our words to each other, that we've been able to avoid getting into a major argument since our wedding.
So, you know, it was a very stressful time, but I am so thankful for those stressors, because it's shaped us into the couple that we are. Most people have a very difficult first year of marriage. We had a very difficult year of engagement. Once we hit marriage, it was smooth sailing. It was great.
And our wedding, by the way, since we had been doing dates, our wedding was August 12, 2007. So you can see there was a few years that progressed from the Spanish camp meeting to when we started our relationship to our engagement and then to our wedding. We actually had quite a long span of time. And as you'll hear from Allison and Alexander, they have a very different story. That's what's so exciting and why it's so neat to be able to share with them, because it helps us to realize that God can work with individuals in such completely different ways, and yet it's still his plan.
So, in closing for this session, we'd like to make sure that we cover the points that we kind of outlined. I guess we didn't outline it at the beginning, but the biggest thing is waiting on the Lord. Make sure that the Lord is leading you in the direction that he is. Pray about it. Talk to your parents about it. Talk to your family about it. And most importantly, study. And make sure that you are in a position to be able to have a relationship.
The second thing that we want to go back and touch on, which we will be discussing more in detail in the next segment, is maintaining that trust with each other and with parents during the beginning stages of a relationship. Because it's very easy, once both people know we're officially now in a relationship, it's so easy just to dive in as a start. We're racing forward, and it's very important at that time to maintain trust with your parents and trust with each other. Because, you know, a lot of the things that we may think, well, this is fine to do with each other, it actually lessens trust, because then the devil can use those later to come back and say, well, you know, that was so easy to get away with that with him. I wonder if he's going to be that easy for somebody else to take him off track down the road. So it's very, very important to maintain trust and physical intimacy in that relationship.
One principle to keep in mind with maintaining trust is if you don't want your parents to see it, probably not a good idea to do it. And then the last thing that is very important that we make sure that we have in line as we work towards a relationship is developing those tools for a successful marriage. If those tools can be developed before the marriage relationship is entered into, it can make that first year of marriage so blissful instead of so stressful like so many people find it. Because when you have those tools developed, when you're able to understand that crazy cycle, the love that the woman needs versus the respect that the man needs, it makes the relationship so much smoother. It makes it so much easier to deal with, and it glorifies God even more.
Mm-hmm. So at this time we are going to take a short break, and for them to change over the tapes and stuff, if you guys want to get water or stand up and stretch your legs, we'll be back here in about 5 minutes.